Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Samson Pomachuk. I am the marketing manager here at Projectworks. It's great to have you with us for this critical conversation on mega projects and the road ahead for Australia's engineers. Across the country, firms are facing increasing pressure to deliver nation-shaping infrastructure with tighter timeframes, leaner teams, and rising expectations. Today is about unpacking that reality and hearing directly from engineering and consulting leaders who navigate this every day. As we speak about infrastructure, land use, and the future of Australia's built environment, it's important to take a moment to acknowledge country. We recognise the traditional custodians of the land, water, and communities we are joining from today. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people here with us. We acknowledge our responsibility to care for her so that future generations can continue to thrive, learn, and live. Thank you. Today's session is brought to you by Projectworks, a project intelligence software purpose-built for engineering consultancies and professional services firms. Our cloud-based software takes in engineering's 6 biggest time killers, timesheets, invoicing, expenses, resourcing, forecasting, and reporting, and automates the heck out of them so you get back to the work that matters and spending more time with your clients. I'd like to introduce our first panelist, our CEO at Projectworks, Mark Orttung. Mark brings more than 2 decades of experience growing consulting firms and leading large-scale technology and software engineering firms. He leads organizations through major transformational, including scaling platforms and engineering functions, serving hundreds of enterprise customers. His background spans Accenture and Bill.com, with deep experience helping organizations use technology to improve project delivery and financial decision-making. To kick off, I'd like to hand it over to Mark to share what he's learned from this year's roundtables, where we hosted over 100 engineering leaders across Australia, as well as themes from our earlier webinar in partnership with Engineers Australia on scaling engineering teams through disruption. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Samson, and hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. As Samson mentioned, I spent some time both with some in-person roundtables in Sydney and Brisbane, as well as some online that were across the country. And actually, I went to a roundtable in London as well, and it was interesting to me that the themes there were actually quite similar for slightly different reasons. But I'd say in all of the different roundtables and discussions, there was a really interesting sort of conflicting set of themes. One was there's a lot of work on the horizon, and the other was that work has not arrived. And so we're sort of struggling a little bit with growth and with cash flow in each of the firms. And so it's an interesting dilemma, and it's one that is near and dear to my heart as I led the software engineering firm Nexient. We grew quite a bit over a 5-year period, but what I found to be the most challenging piece of running the firm was hiring and selling new work at the same time, sort of balancing the ability to have enough people. So when you sell new work, you can start when you say you could and get the jobs up and running, versus selling enough work so you don't have a lot of people sitting on the bench and sort of hitting your margin. So I think in 7 years of running that firm, I had 5 days where I had those two things perfectly aligned. It's just very, very challenging. And so that's what I heard across these roundtables was knowing that a lot of firms knowing that they need to hire to deal with this demand that's coming, whether it be for the net zero transition, infrastructure investments, or the Brisbane Olympics. In each of different sort of geographies, there's different things coming. And yet many of them have people on the bench and don't really have the extra cash flow to hire yet. Um, what I would say, and we'll get into this in the discussion, is I think that cash is king in these kinds of situations, especially as you're in the moment where you're really trying to run a tight ship before you begin to grow. And so looking at project margins, looking at utilization and all of these pieces very tightly is critical. And then that can free up a little bit of extra cash to begin to fuel your growth as you hopefully time it just perfectly for the wave of opportunity that's coming. So looking forward to diving in. Thank you, Samson.
Thanks, Mark. Now I'd like to introduce our other panelists. We have Brendan Thomas, co-founder and director of NGNU. Brendan is a proud Darug man and an engineering leader with over 20 years across property, construction, and major infrastructure experience. His work at Lendlease, CBA, and now NGNU focuses on culturally intelligent project delivery and increasing First Nations participation in infrastructure. Brendan brings a unique perspective on how technical, social, and cultural dimensions shape Australia's major projects. Welcome, Brendan. Now we have Ben Schnitzerling, co-founder and director of Red Fox Advisory. Ben has more than 20 years of experience leading complex infrastructure programs across Australia. Formerly a regional director at ARUP, he oversaw over 1,000 people and over 270 million in annual revenue, including mega project portfolios. As a fellow of Engineers Australia, he is known for helping teams navigate complexity, improve delivery systems, and create lasting impact on large-scale projects. Welcome, Ben. So thank you, all three panelists. You have a wealth of experience between the three of you. So I'm very much looking forward to diving into these conversations. We'll kick off with a few questions of our own. And then please, our live guests joining us today, put your questions in the Q&A function on your screen. We have a technical team behind the scenes keeping an eye out for the questions. So please, when it's near the time at the end of this webinar, we will be looking to answer those questions. So please have them through when you think of them. Let's dive into our first topic. So it's mega projects and complexity. Ben, perhaps you can take this one to start off with. When you are looking at the next decade of nation-shaping infrastructure, what stands out as the biggest complexity engineering leaders must be ready for and why?
Yeah, and look, I always find this a really interesting topic. I think before we look to the future, it's worthwhile to have a look backwards and see what we've just gone through. So I've been working in the engineering industry now since 1996, and I've seen the waves of ups and downs that the industry typically goes through. In the early 2000s, it was generally pretty tough. We then had a bit of a build injection, and then it softened again, then another injection around, gas projects, iron ore projects, etc., dipped again. And then at around about the 2010, 2011, we started to see an upkick again. And we often talk about as the tsunami of work that came to the market. And when you look in the context of Australia, and even more broadly, an insatiable appetite to building new projects. Every major capital city in Australia has pretty much needed a new metro, major road projects, water projects. So the spend in infrastructure over the last 15 years or 14 years has been highly unusual compared to fairly standard typical years. Now, through that period, population growth has steadily held at about 2.5%, whereas the spend per head of population has gone through the roof. So if we look to the future, what's the obvious challenge that we have? The demand for the community to supply services to the community will still remain high. What do we have across the country at the moment? We still need to move people in an efficient way. We still need water to supply to the community. We still need hospitals, we need schools, and then we have other events like the Olympics here in Queensland, which will put pressure on the industry. Now, that is a demand that is there. We can't ignore that. You need to respond to it. The big burning platform, I suppose, sitting there is how do you fund it? So again, if we look back over the last 10 years, there has always been a way for funding to be found to actually prop up these projects. And it'd be fair to say across the industry, whether it was, and it's not unique to any particular industry in engineering or state, projects have gone in at a particular budget and we have seen fairly substantial cost increase. So looking to the future, what's the big challenge? I think the ability for for scope to creep and value to creep is fast diminishing. So someone entering the industry now and someone, looking to lead these mega projects, I think the thing they need to be thinking about is, how do I do more with less? How do I actually cut the cloth to suit? Now, that doesn't mean I cut service or I cut what I actually build. It's how do I innovate and think differently to actually achieve the outcome that we need and want as a community. That's incredibly hard to achieve that, but that's the challenge coming forward: efficiency and innovation.
Thank you, Ben. I hear there around that scope creep, and the theme of doing more with less has definitely come up in our times, in our roundtables as well. Brendan, what's your perspective here?
Thanks, Samson, and really appreciate that context, Ben. Also, thank you very much for having us here today. Very excited to be part of these discussions. One of the ones that comes to mind, we're fortunate enough to support both state and federal government recently on a project referred to as the Sydney and Newcastle High Speed Rail. And so that's one of these projects that falls into this category. And if I draw on lots of the challenges we had going through some of those early phases of arguably what is a nation-shaping project, all the things that Ben mentioned, absolutely, when it comes to a very busy market, there's been a huge uplift in infrastructure spend. There's been a lot of creep when it comes to how steady prices are for material and labour. But then adding a few other perspectives on that one as well is when it comes to land acquisition. So, when we talk about nation shaping and infrastructure projects, that there is arguably a huge amount there that requires significant acquisitions, as we all know, sort of whether it's a CBD, regional, or even agricultural areas, that land acquisition process is becoming a lot more complex. And they're things that are a big part of both a program, but also a cost of doing business there. The other part that we really kicked around, we've got a few large unsolicited proposals we're working with different clients on at the moment. And some of those, the conversation we're really having front and center is around labour availability. So Ben rightly mentioned, sort of the excitement that is the 2032 Brisbane Olympics on the back of some huge infrastructure projects. But the thing that we do know is we do not have sufficient labour, and that is both skilled labour, non-skilled labour, technical labour within the country to deliver the pipeline of projects that we know is coming with some very clear deadlines. And so I think it'll be really interesting as we're developing project pipelines, as we're developing designs, as we're starting to understand what new technologies look like. I do feel like this will be a phase in a number of these projects where it'll be a tail wagging the dog situation, where it won't be a design-led, it won't be an engineering-led conversation. As an industry, we'll be forced to rethink with some of those constraints, how are we going to achieve these outcomes that Ben rightly pointed out, but with alternate methods, whether that is, obviously lots of us are having different both conversations and delivering projects where we're doing it slightly different to previously. Sort of we've got a 12-story fully modular, including lift core, floors, facades, the whole lot, box and dice, all with offsite manufacturing. We're doing feasibility on sort of how high we can push some of those things. So, and that is very much a price-driven conversation and very much a labour-driven conversation. So I think it will be interesting to see how when we're seeing some of those productivity rates that we're seeing up in Queensland especially, that will change that business case and those economics to make some solutions that haven't stacked up in the past that will very quickly come back to the forefront. And as I mentioned, that's really going to push us as an industry, how we accommodate that from the start.
Appreciate your perspective there, Brendan. Labour availability as well was another theme we heard throughout the country. Rethinking with constraints leads us very nicely to the next question. So mega projects require decisions with sometimes imperfect or gaps in information, particularly at this level and size of a project. What's one moment where complexity forced you to rethink your approach? Ben, how about you go have a first crack at this one?
I think well, there's a few of these, but I've been delivering a few projects recently. And one we did, there was a bridge we built over a major waterway system, and we knew it was going to flood. And I always love when people talk about the concept of latent condition. Oh, I didn't expect that to occur, or it's a now. I was just sitting in a forum where they were talking about latent condition. I said, well, if it's an event that you know could potentially occur, that does not make it a latent condition. It's an event that you actually need to actively engage in to manage the risk. So we did this bridge over this major river system that we knew was going to, had a high probability of of um, of flooding. So that's a risk. So you could ignore it and try and pass the risk to another party, or alternatively, you could confront it, take it head on. And that's what we chose to do. So we actually wrote a different procurement model to say, we are aware that this would occur. We said to the market when they were tendering, this is how we want you to price it. This is how we will deal with it. And in particular, we said the fairest way is you price it, tell us, and if the event occurs, we'll pay you. Now, people thought that was a really bizarre way of doing it because they said, well, you might have to pay money out. So, well, the cost is a cost. So as an industry, you got to get back to grassroots of, well, what are we trying to achieve, and how do we fairly and equitably deal with the unknowns of our industry, and ultimately we've probably lived through most risks. How do we pull those lessons learned and actually develop them a little bit more to actually confront it head on? I think we do that really effectively. There's a really exciting future for us as an industry. And just picking up on Brendan's earlier comments, I think, and I work in linear infrastructure, I think there's a huge amount of lessons that can be learned and approaches from various parts of our industry that, for instance, not in linear. So the vertical industry, and in particular private development, they're much more courageous to have a go at some things differently, to think differently. So whilst the future of delivery of major projects or mega projects can be confronting, equally it's super exciting because that will force us to do things differently. That will be the time that people will be prepared to say, I'm going to take a learning from the aviation industry and apply it to our delivery of a rail job or whatever it may be. That is the really exciting time that I think we've got ahead for us.
Thank you, Ben. Brendan, can you share a time when imperfect information made you rethink your approach?
Yeah, that probably only applies to about 99% of our projects, I'd say,
not much.
Samson. But yeah, look, like lots of us in industry, when it comes to imperfect projects, that's really our role. NGNU, we're a project management development advisory firm, and so really it is around taking those learnings, and that's sort of that Ben spoke about. So it's taking those learnings, understanding what trends have happened before. And then working with the client to understand how that manifests into a defined brief. There can be things that aren't well defined in a project, but like Ben said, sort of we're not in the software industry. Sort of most construction still sort of runs a fairly conventional sequence with certain dependencies. So it is for us very much taking those call it lessons learned, standard methodologies in delivery, really defining a brief, having those conversations at the start of a project, I think are fairly critical. But also having those stage gates or reviews as well, where sort of whilst some of our projects that we're working on are sort of 15-year master plans, they're no critical to having a 3-month milestone where you're having a clear delivery, a clear achievable, and an outcome achieved over a short period, the same way you would if you were delivering a 6-month project. So, and I think that one does apply, whether it is a large infrastructure project or whether it's a master plan development. It's really the focus on defining and achieving outcomes at set milestones.
Thank you, Brendan. Now, what I got from that was definitely hearing the both of you mentioned themes around thinking differently, and with our next topic that we're jumping into next with technology, data, and decision making. Now, technology is definitely a topic that's talked across all industries, not just engineering. And we're not just saying AI, but it's the way that we are using technology as a whole with how we're thinking, how we're behaving, and also the decisions that we're making. So next, we'll move on to this next topic. I'll start with you, Mark. A question for you. Where are you seeing firms use data or systems in a way that fundamentally changes project outcomes?
Yeah, I think I see a couple of key areas. One, really having a system with a comprehensive view of prior projects can give you the ability to learn from them and to understand the different things, the inflection points that happened in your prior projects, and applying those patterns into the projects that you've got now, I think is really important. And then taking the data about who worked on the projects, what they added to the project, and really having a robust profile of the people on your team makes it so much easier to put together the project, right? So having that robust sort of profile, if you will, of everyone on your team, especially as the team begins to grow, it gets harder and harder to keep track of who exactly is an expert in which pieces. And having a system that brings that data to you just makes it that much easier to put the right team together for the project.
Thank you, Mark. Ben, I know you have experience in this, having been responsible for over 207 million in annual revenue. That must not be easy. Now, data and systems must have been vital to knowing what's happening in each project in your organization, particularly the large-scale projects. Could you share a bit of insight there in your experience?
Yeah, and look, and we obviously we use Projectworks ourselves, and it's having at your fingertips the ability to drill into projects and understand, well, where are you? How are you performing? And what is the lead indicator? And I think you want to couple data with pragmatism and using your insights to try and determine where do you think it's all going. So I always say I love this concept of aggregated market intelligence and predictions to try and predict where jobs will potentially go wrong. And if you look at the mega projects, I find it really intriguing that quite often we'll start a job and then we'll act surprised when it turns a little bit south at the end. And there's always some key data points at the start. So it's this whole concept of willful optimism. And I've given a few presentations where you talk about the life cycle of a project. So when you think about it, you have the tendering phase, whether it be for a consulting service or a build or whatever it might be. So that's ultimately where you're setting the path forward. And you win the job, you drink the champagne, and you congratulate yourself on a job well done. And for the first, up to about 20% through the job, there's a level of it's all going to be good. And generally, if it's not going to be good, that's where you'll start to get some lead indicators of, look, there's a problem here. Now, as an industry more generally, we choose to ignore it. We don't choose to have that hard conversation around there might be a problem here. We generally leave it to the back end, and then we convince ourselves that someone's going to cough up some extra money. So we use this idea around what are the lead indicators out of all the thousands of projects around the industry. What are the common patterns? What are the things that we look for that will be an indicator? So, for instance, changes in key people. That is a lead indicator that something's going wrong. Changes in communications, changes in behavior. So they're the softer skills, but you can absolutely measure that using data. But with the aggregated market intelligence at the mega project level, the whole industry has views. So there's this whole concept of what could we do to get everyone's view? Project X has been awarded for $10 billion. Do you believe it is going to come in on the $10 billion? Now, that's a critical question, because if the whole industry says, no, we don't believe that, what's that telling you? And how, in a client organization, you can't go and say, well, I might have a problem then. But in fact, how do we get to the point where we say the industry actually thinks there's going to be a problem here? What do we do about it? Because once the project has gone into problem territory, it's almost impossible to recover it, because there's a change in attitude, change in behavior, so those in delivery. So what does that all come back to? I think it's an industry. We have a lot of data there. We just got to use it better and use the prediction around, do we think the job is going to end well or not. And if it's not, then the human element comes in. Be courageous to step in and do something about it. That's the real key. And if we do that right, be a much better industry.
Thank you, Ben. I do remember our previous conversations. You do feel like there is a lot of data out there, and as an industry, how can you collectively, maybe present or share each other's data to really see what the real value of a project is, and making sure that it is beneficial for all, not only just the economy, but that no one else is spending extra money for these big mega projects. So I appreciate your perspective on that. Brendan, you've been nodding there. I think you nodded to the 10 billion question. So you get a lot of those daily. Was there anything that you wanted to share there around your perspective?
I think it's yeah, you could probably list out the majority of major infrastructure projects that have followed that similar path, and very much an industry where can fall into, and it's funny, it's an industry that has different sectors and different levels. Once we hit a site level, subcontractor level, things are very defined and there's robust conversations, and also the practice in industry of administering contracts to what I'd say is a high standard. The more senior you go, the more strategic the project is. The more that you lose some of those elements of being able to have good, honest conversations. Things typically turn a little bit more political, and so you do lose that ability to be able to bring hard conversations to the forefront. Obviously, that's our role. That's what you want to do. But I definitely agree with the methodology of things need to be measured and quantified as well. So there's one part where you have an element there around gut feel, experience, industry sentiment. That's where we draw, like lots of the people on this call, that's where you draw on all your experiences of previous projects. That's where you draw on the experienced people in the firms of the consultants you use, of the contracts you use, to have those fairly colloquial discussions around market sentiments, sort of what market trends are, availability of certain elements. And then it's around validating all of those things with the right data, to then sort of escalate those things at the earliest stage possible, to then make those effective changes. And like we all know, sort of the earlier that you make a change in a project, not only are the greater amount of variables still available, but you're also able to sort of influence a greater volume when it comes to that tailor project spend. So we're optimistic, and I'd say sort of never's too late. But the earlier the hugely more beneficial it will be, and sort of that those savings or that return can be influenced a lot easier.
Thanks, Brendan. Lead indicators, availability of resourcing is something that comes into mind, and absolutely, if you spot those sort of outliers, or you're heading towards that chaos zone, to action something sooner rather than later is definitely better for the project, but also better for business. Now, Mark, lead indicators. We love lead indicators because that's what Projectworks presents to a lot of our engineering firms. Now, what does technology meaningfully improve? So, sorry, let me repeat that. Where does technology meaningfully improve decision making, and how can the data in these platforms be used in pitching for future work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something we've been working a lot on, is how do we take where you've had success in the past and turn it into more work for your firm. So it's an area that we've just built out a new product. It's gone into a very small group beta with some of our customers, where you can use the product to create proposals for new work. And it's a AI tool that helps you in a couple of ways. It's actually kind of been a fun project because we're trying to apply AI in the way that the human beings need to work together, rather than just assume it's going to solve the problem for you. And the idea of getting a proposal out from a firm isn't just about writing the document. A lot of it is about curating the content across your firm. So what is the latest and greatest that you have on a given topic, and the collaboration of a number of people in your firm. So what we're doing is we're in that context, we're building a tool that allows you to pull in your successful proposals from the past, and AI will summarize them and break them out into these content blocks, which you can then edit and sort of maintain. And then you can bring in the problem statement you've got, and it'll give you a draft proposal, which you can then work from. So we're trying to help people really keep that unique voice that the firm has, that can produce a very, what I would call in technology a pixel perfect, looks like designers created it type proposal. But it really brings together all of the knowledge that your firm has, and you can hopefully save a lot of time for the experts in your firm. And that maybe helps a little bit with the labor availability. If they're spending less time chasing new work, maybe they can spend more time with their current projects and focus on that. And the piece of time they do put into a new proposal is very focused on looking at how the system put together prior patterns that worked and just tweaking them to make sure they are in fact appropriate for the new problem statement. So yeah, I think that's an example of how prior patterns and pulling the data together can really help you make decisions and bring new work to the firm.
Thank you, Mark. Ben, how does this technology show up in your work?
Yeah, look, data is the tool that we use to inform our business going forward. And so, as Mark pointed out, we always look back and, for instance, a project. So we're in the industry of designing and delivering projects for clients. So we want to know, to do a typical project, whether it be a building or whatever, what is the typical hours that we would spend on that? And then you look at it off, am I getting more efficient? Am I being able to do it more cost effectively? That's a key data point for us to then go and offer to our clients, because everyone's trying to find that edge in the market. The flip side is, with data, you can get bamboozled by the level of data, and understanding what do you need to measure versus what do you like to measure, and then with all of that, what can that do to your business around driving behaviours, and who do you share it with? And for anyone who's on the call around from the consulting industry, one of the key measures people often call up is utilisation or billability. How much am I charging to a client? And whilst that gives you an important metric, it can drive very poor outcomes if you're not careful how you talk about it, how you utilise it. So someone who may not be working on a live project may be bringing huge amounts of value to your business in a different way. So because their billability low does not mean they are not valuable. So I think it's having that mature conversation around value. How do we bring value to our clients? How do we bring value to our customers? And how do we bring value to our business, and using that data to try and assess it? So at a very simple level, we say, is our business growing? Are we making profit? Yep, that's priority number one. And then, as long as you're getting that growth in particular around your business, that's most important. The way that we achieve that is getting into the detail. Are we doing it more efficiently? Are we investing in technology to deliver things faster and with less? That's how we certainly utilise data in our business.
Thank you, Ben. What do you need to measure is definitely important. I mean, if you've got a lot of data, does not necessarily mean you have to view all that data and make sense of all of it. But utilization is something at Projectworks as well that we speak of. Now, with measuring specific data points, this leads on very nicely to our next topic, which is, not necessarily something that you measure from a data point, but it is something that most organizations should consider when they are working on mega infrastructure projects, and that is cultural inclusion and community impact, right? And so this third topic focuses in on that. And this area in particular is reshaping project delivery to go beyond mere compliance. And so to start us off, I would like to direct this question to Brendan. What does beyond compliance actually look like when building culturally inclusive project delivery models?
Thanks, Samson. Really appreciated. Look, this is a topic I could talk forever about, but in the interest of time, we'll try and keep it to a few key points. I guess that there's a few things that come to mind straight away, which would be a good opportunity to share. Yeah, in our world, whether it's infrastructure, construction, master plan developments, yeah, as a team, we come into a place, we cause a big fuss, make a big impact, and then we go away hopefully with the understanding that we've created something that someone needs, and done a somewhat decent job at it. The biggest takeaway for us to be conscious of is when it comes to anything we do is we are impacting country, and hopefully we're having a positive impact on community. So regardless of the project, any construction project will have a fairly significant impact on country. Sort of whether that's through excavation, whether it's through some of the emissions, whether it's through manufacturing, a whole heap of those things. And so it is important for us just to be conscious of that. Lots of our projects now obviously have significant targets as far as doing that in the most net zero manner possible, but they do have an impact. And so one of the things, the reason I highlight that is regardless, we're going to have an impact. And so then it's around recognizing that, and then having those conversations as early as possible. So when it comes to cultural inclusion, it isn't around us in projects dictating what we think community or sort of the cultural opportunities of that project look like. These genuinely, the same way as any community consultation that occurs, it happens the same way with the cultural elements as well. So really engagement has to start at day zero. Just for consistency, drawing on those conversations. When we're kicking off the Sydney-Newcastle high-speed rail business case phase, really phenomenal team that recognise that we're traversing a whole heap of different communities, country, and some very significant locations as well. There was a maturity in that program to say before we do anything, sort of whether it's sort of any test drilling or sort of even survey, the first thing we did was get out and talk to those community representatives. And when I say community here, I'm talking about traditional owners from the Aboriginal communities that we're going to impact. The value and hopefully the legacy for that project is that those communities were engaged day one. They have the opportunity to know about things that we're going to be doing to disturb their country, but they also had the opportunity to tell us firsthand what their community needs were. Both what was culturally significant, but what are their specific needs or challenges that their community is facing, and then us as a collective figuring out how through the delivery of this project, we're able to have a positive legacy or minimize impact. So when we talk about this stuff, if we go back 10 years ago, I almost make parallels here to where Green Star in Australia rating was 20, well, this sounds old now, probably 25 years ago, when we all knew that it was the right thing, but there was a fair bit of cost uplift. And as an asset owner, an asset operator, there wasn't the metrics yet to tell you that you're going to receive this return on that investment. But people did it because it's the right thing. There was also a market demand, which was happy to pay for it as well. When it comes to cultural inclusion and how we think about a country-led approach or a community-led approach, I think we're in a similar phase. We're actually doing a research piece with a number of universities. We've been involved in upwards of $15 billion worth of work now that has had elements of design with country or a community or cultural-led engagement. We're doing a research piece to start to document those items to then track how that is creating a return on that asset over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. When it comes to both an asset value, when it comes to minimization of operational costs, when it comes to shifts in maintenance, but also when it comes to the actual enjoyment of an asset and how people use that as well. So I think it starts with day zero. You can never have those conversations early enough. Gone are the days of social targets. So, lots of our government projects there would be a 3% or 1.5% target when it comes to either spend or participation. So that's typically, sort of a certain percentage spend with First Nations owned businesses. And then the same participation is really just the amount of labour, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander labour on a project. What we're starting to see now, and this is because of those community-led discussions, what we're starting to see now is actually talking about these large projects are going to be running for an extended period of time, which starts to offer really positive opportunity when it comes to economic empowerment and scaling. So it's not around having a huge impact up front, but it could be around partnerships, whether it's with individuals, whether it's with organizations or whole communities, to understand, okay, this project is going to last for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. There will be these needs in the delivery and construction of the project. There will be these needs in the professional services part of the project, but there will also be these needs when it comes to maintenance and operation of the asset. There will be these needs when it comes to manufacturing opportunities that might be present. And those needs, targeting those and building a development plan where you're working with community through that process is the sort of things that community are interested in when we've delivered these projects. So it's really thinking about, sort of not just finding a black business who we can get a heap of spend with a minimal amount of risk. The whole industry is a hell of a lot more mature than that now. We've got a heap of black businesses that we partner with and work with who have revenues up in the sort of $500 million. So it's not an immature industry anymore. So I think there's some really positive opportunities there, but it does start with that community-led approach. And when we talk about community stuff, we always talk about country first. Country, no one, communities, individuals, we can't live without country. So country supplies everything we need. And so if we look after country, she'll look after us. And that's sort of how we look at that life cycle. And we try and apply that in any of those projects that we do as well.
Thank you, Brendan. I appreciate that you could go for hours on this, and we would have loved to keep hearing you speak about that. I surely do. What sticks out to me was legacy. There's the word impact, but then there's legacy, right? Legacy is longer lasting. Impact is, can be sudden, could be short term, could be long term. I think the word legacy really sums that up really nicely. Ben, I'd like you to, if you could comment, perhaps half a minute there around.
Yeah, look, and Brendan's covered that really well. So I commend him on that. And I suppose the very similar thoughts. So it's about defining the why. Why are we doing it? Not fixating on the what we have to do. And to Brendan's point, when there's a stipulated, these are mandated goals and so forth, people fixate on that, forget about that. And I always use the example, I've done a number of bridges in regional centres, and people think we're building a bridge for the traffic. Yeah, that's kind of one part of it, but it's actually not the real goal. We're there to support the community. We're there to actually train some people, to provide employment. There's a whole range of other reasons why we do it. So it's saying to our industry and everyone who's on the call today, always start that job and say, why are we here and what does success look like? And to Brendan's point, you embed it from day one. What does success look like? How to engage the local communities? How do we get their thoughts and beliefs into what we're about to do? You do all that, works out just fine.
Thank you, Ben, for keeping that shorter. We are moving through to our final topic so that we have time for some questions from our live audience. So if you do have questions, please put them through in the Q&A box function on your screen in front of you, and we'll make sure to answer a few of those if we can. So the next and final topic is the theme of this whole webinar, which is the road ahead. 2026, we've had an interesting 2025. A lot of people have chosen not to even theme it because it just was so volatile. So let's just say we're looking ahead now. When talking about the road ahead, coming down to, balancing people, cost, risk, value, delivery, legacy even is what we've been talking about. Let's answer this question, and I guess I will open up to the panelists. There's been, conversation around shared risk, procurement methodologies changing or being very complex at times, value for money. And I think, Ben, this would be great for you to start off with, is how do we get best outcomes for the economy without actually sending our firms broke, without, having them not paid or waiting for a long time because different stakeholders are sort of trying to coordinate themselves. I know you're not going to solve the problem, but I would really like to hear your views and thoughts on this.
Yeah. And look, it's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I think it starts with there is no silver bullet. And everyone's looking for the contract form that solves all these problems. And I hate to break it to everyone, but it doesn't exist. And so what it actually means is sitting down again at the start with the key decision makers saying, well, what does success look like? It is okay for industry to make money. It's actually a necessary part. And we can't ignore the fact that money drives behaviour. So if someone's making a bit of money, or if I look at the construction industry, if they're making some profit, guess what? They do a really good job. If you put them into distress, they will have to respond. There's no way around that. So I think it's being, and the word I consistently use is being courageous as an industry to stop and say, let's give some considered advice and have a mature conversation. What can we do differently? This job here, the outcome we want to achieve is this. What are the steps we need to do to get there and get the industry together to talk about it? That means contractors, consultants, client organisations, and community representatives. And you all sit down and have a talk about it. And a simple thing we could be doing is have an advisory board to a project. Really simple. External people with different views and perspectives on life, and say, maybe have a think about this. Is this the right thing to do? Again, a little bit left field, but I think we try a few things like that. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating for sure.
Thank you. Brendan, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing on a number of our projects, and it's not even the large projects, it's projects in general, is this concept of shared risk. So traditionally, the industry is one that's been very structured. The idea that as you hit certain milestones or achieve certain outcomes or a contract, is that you're essentially buying down your risk. Someone else is buying your risk. You've paid for a definitive outcome. You have a mechanism to then enforce that. That has proved, to not be resilient enough to deal with a shifting market. Then we've got a whole heap of other uncertainties on top of that. So a number of our clients, depending on the engagement, we're structuring conversations around understanding what shared risk looks like. Because do you know what, whether clients like it or not, that risk has really remains theirs regardless. Sort of there is obviously legal mechanisms that are expensive, that are arduous, and depending on the project size and type, there might not be a way to recover those costs, and you still are in a situation that it's going to cost you more to deliver that project. So the mature conversations around understanding what risk you can ring fence and have someone purchase, and when I say purchase, under the right contract structure, but also having those conversations with the client that, until the project is done, until, the project has been operational for a certain period, there always remains a risk. And it's being able to quantify that and then have mature discussions around, is the best thing in this situation to have some defined objectives, some defined costs, but understanding that regardless, you aren't going to be able to remove that risk from your program. And having those conversations up front allows for those provisions to then be made, both in expectation settings, upwards with government or sort of investors, but also downwards when you're procuring a project as well. Because we are seeing a number of operators who just won't operate in certain markets. And really just to finish up on Samson, how does this manifest into managing risk in other ways? We're doing a large defense project, number of billions of dollars over a number of years, a lot of physical site constraints. The way that we advised on mitigating risk there was around supplier and market diversity. So rather than essentially giving a couple of billions of dollars of work to each of your tier one builders, we looked there around criticality. And so then we packaged some stuff up to create a portion of works that might be $50 million. That's going to target a certain sector. Then there will couple it a couple of $100 million. Otherwise, what we see is that if you don't apply that thinking and methodology, you're essentially cannibalizing your own market and cannibalizing your own costs. We always think about who is the person, holding the tools, getting the splinters, doing the physical work with their hands. and making sure that those different procurement methodologies and contract structures means that we can access all of those markets rather than just going to a whole heap of tier ones who then have all the same consultant and subcontractor base as well. So to us, that is a really big part in understanding what risk can be mitigated in a cost-effective manner.
Thank you, Brendan. I know that there's a lot of live attendees on at the moment, and I hope there's some really great insights and practical tools. And I appreciate you both sharing such great stories, particularly personal to your organization, and the maturity of shared risk. That's three words that often don't hear together, and actually having conversations about that. To your point, Ben, earlier, who's left paying, sort of that older way of thinking, rather than let's come together earlier and talk about these risks. And so if these risks come about, what's our plan together? And it's about thinking differently. And if we can do that together now, there'll be more of us in terms of firms for next year and the years ahead. So thank you, both of you, for that. We will go into live audience questions. Thank you so much for those who have put some in. We have one here from Deborah. It's for you, Mark. How can technology enable engineering firms and professional consulting firms to pursue RFPs and new business with greater efficiency and intelligence? Thank you, Deborah, for that question.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. Great question. And it's what I was speaking about earlier. I think this idea of applying AI and sort of the process within your firm to mine your successful proposals or RFP responses look quite a lot like proposals. So you can also do quite a similar process with RFPs, where you pull in your prior RFPs and the answers, build a library of content that you can maybe tune as you look at the different blocks. And then as you get new RFPs, it's quite easy then using the same tool to generate a response. And some of these RFPs can be, as you guys know, dozens, hundreds of questions, pages. They go on and on and on, it seems. And so just getting a draft, I always find it much easier to edit than it is to write from a blank box that I need to put the answer into. And so hopefully that really makes you much more efficient, as well as brings a lot of what you've said in the past or what your team has said in the past. So it's kind of bringing the knowledge or the intelligence of the firm to bear on that new RFP. So I'm a big fan of these tools, and happy offline to share what we're doing and give you a sense for how that works.
Thank you, Mark. I have another question here from an anonymous attendee, and I'll hand it over to the panelist who is passionate about this topic. So it's around labour being a major concern, and because of labour shortages, burnout is at an all-time high. How can we use technology to address these issues? Anyone want to take that?
I'm happy to go first. I think, and what I'm about to say is two slightly different things. So if I look in the consulting world, which I predominantly work in, I'm just intrigued that if I take a bridge as an example, every bridge that comes along, it's got to be redesigned, and we spend huge amounts of effort and energy to develop it up. And I often say to people, I was talking to a client in Western Australia not that long ago, and they said, "Are you telling me that we haven't designed a 30-meter long bridge somewhere in the country before?" And the answer is, yeah, we probably have. It's all there. It's all been done, but we redo it pretty much every time. So in one regard, if we could centralize that, it'd never be 100% when they first get it. But you say we must be able to get to 70% through a proof of concept pretty quick if we use technology a lot faster. That would reduce the amount of effort that goes into getting it to that point. It would streamline it, make it more efficient in getting out to market. So that's step one. The flip side and the counter argument to that is we're building these bridges like we always have. And so what's the step change that we're going to get in our construction industry that we don't need people out in the sun, out in the heat, in harm's way building this? What's the step change to actually get back to more manufacturing style delivery of projects? There's certain elements that you just can't get around, but I think there is, again, this big conversation we have to have is when do we move from what we've always done, and that constant argument, this is how we always do it, and these are all the risks of change. I'd like to be having the conversation. It's not the risk of change, it's the potential in the opportunity of changing. And so if I look at bridges, why do we always use the standard composition? Well, that's what we've always done. There must be a better way of doing it. Let's find somewhere and do it and give it a try, and we'll learn from it. They're my counter argument to myself.
That's great. Yeah, you can see why you are managing director of Red Fox Advisory, and it's great having firms like yours out there, challenging status quo and thinking differently. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd maybe just add a little bit to that. Totally different, but as you said at the top, I think technology, and this is something I'm passionate about, can take away a lot of the admin and a lot of the things that most of us did not get into the business to do time cards, to do invoices, to do all, there's a whole lot of stuff that you need to do to run your firm. And the more technology can make that stuff, fewer hours, less effort, so that you can focus on designing the next bridge or trying to figure out that step change, I think the better. And I think that will also address burnout, because I think it's just one of those kinds of things kind of grate on you. They're not enjoyable. Hopefully the core work is enjoyable. And so, yeah, just I'd say use technology as well to automate the back office and sort of the admin, so you can do the more enjoyable work.
And Brendan, I need to ask you this because I follow your company's LinkedIn page, and I know burnout is probably something you don't let your workers do in your organization, and you join them up to some physical marathons and Ironmans. How do you manage burnout within your team? It doesn't have to be from a technology perspective either.
Yeah, I think there's two parts. So internally within a team, you have sort of, no surprise, we use Projectworks, and that starts to give us those forecasting. So that gives us those lead indicators. We put all of our tenders in there as well. So that's how we sort of manage pipeline as well. And Mark, definitely sign us up to test out some of those new tender writing capabilities. But the one I was going to say when it comes to, and it probably answers one and a half of these questions, is, when it talks about productivity. So, we know that we've got productivity issues when it comes to construction in Australia. Sort of Brisbane, quite infamously, has had a few major projects, down to 2.4 days productivity per week. In New South Wales, we're sort of, depending on the sector, about 3.5 to 4 days productivity. But keeping in mind, lots of these sites are operating 7 days a week. So, to me, until that number is close to 100% efficiency, there is, to me, there's wasted effort in the system there. And that is the reason why lots of these modular conversations are occurring. When we look at these modular methods of construction, or modern methods of construction, essentially what we're doing is we're reducing wastage. We're reducing, people are doing things efficiently. They're not driving their ute to the front of a site, dropping off stuff, getting out, walking 20 minutes after they find some parking for the day. Like, these are all things that we're paying for as an industry, that sort of we need to find ways to do it better. And I think when it comes to the last question, I think that's one of our biggest challenges is sort of the short-term political view. Means that it takes a very ambitious government or consistent terms in order to get a business case to stack up, which sort of I don't know the answer to, but it is just recognizing that it is a genuine challenge. And we've had projects where that change in government, like Ben said, change in key people, has occurred, and it makes it a really challenging and, once again, inefficient process when it comes to executing a project.
Thank you, Brendan. For those listening, there was another question, and Brendan was looking at was around the political willingness and related agenda in a project with relatively long gestation period. We don't, unfortunately, have time to continue answering that question, unfortunately, because it is now to the dot of the hour. So we appreciate. First of all, I just want to say thank you to our panelists today, Mark Orttung, Brendan Thomas, and Ben Schnitzerling. It's been a privilege to facilitate this session and hear some insights on various topics we've covered today. If you'd like to continue the conversation with any of our panelists, there will be details that will be sent out. But also, if you would like to know more about Projectworks or receive a copy of our industry trends and insights report, which we just recently published, we'll share it in this webinar link right now, if you can see it in the Q&A function, but also we'll be sending it via email as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.